The next structure we're going to talk about is foreground, middle ground, and background. This one comes with a little bit of extra information, right? It always needs to be paired with a buddy. It doesn't stand alone. So let's look into that. Generally speaking, I mean, foreground, middle ground, background, you've been using since you were in kindergarten and also anytime that you have your eyes open, because it's just how realistic space works, right? This is in the front, then I'm in the middle ground, and the wall behind me is my background. Like, that is just how physical space works, and we live in this physical space. So this one can come naturally, but it also sometimes is a little misleading. All right, so let's look at the checklist of rules. The elements in the foreground are emphasized. They're going to be larger or in higher contrast. They're going to have more detail. Now, this, with foreground, middle ground, background, those emphasized elements happen in the foreground. Okay, with other things, you're adding a focal area anywhere. But you'll notice that, like, this tree is the closest to us, it's the darkest. If this were colorful, it would have the most color. We would see the most detail. We can see branches in this one. The one in the background is just like a lollipop tree. There's no branch. There's not a lot of detail. And then that illusion of real space is created using overlapping. And then, like I mentioned before, the visual weight is managed using an additional structure. This example here is paired with pyramid. It might look very similar to the pyramid example, but we'll compare them in a minute and see how they're different. And you might notice that it doesn't say anything about a focal area here. Yes, that is because you need to manage the placement of your focal area using an additional structure. That's why it needs a buddy. You might have noticed that this example, well, this diagram of foreground, middle ground, background, is not balanced. It is very heavy leaning off to the side because this heavy amount of emphasis, this focal area tree, is pushed all the way to the side. It is not a successful composition overall. It is a successful example of foreground, middle ground, and background, but it is not a successful composition yet. So let's look at several examples so we can see this at play. This one gets a little better. The picture is blurry, but the concept is there. We've got foreground, middle ground, background, and pyramid. Foreground, we have the shoes. We see the most detail of the shoes, even if we did have a clear copy of this picture. The dude is in the middle ground. We see less detail, and then the background is the background scene of the picture. When we talk about photography, we go into detail about making sure your background is not distracting. So that is something always to keep in mind. If you are drawing or painting or creating this in a way that you have complete control over your background, you get to make all those choices for yourself. This guy is foreground, middle ground, background, and center bias. And you might notice that there's a lot going on, but overall it's center bias. Usually compositions they don't look like the diagram. They're like smack dab perfect examples. We're not trying to create perfect examples. We're trying to use these rules to make sure that our compositions are pleasing to the eye, lead the viewer to what's important in the work, and are easy to read. And so, like, this is a poster. So the Avengers symbol is perfectly centered. We know that's important from the contrast, the fact that it's focal area because of words, so many reasons. Perfectly center bias. Then we have our secondary focal area is these glowing orbs. Like, has pretty high emphasis. This one also, because it's glowing and there's high contrast here. We also have a face. Okay, so for all of these things is like this oddly shaped focal area on this guy. Oh my goodness, it can't come to me. Iron Man, there we go. And then you might be like, okay, but we're leaning this way. So you can look at the artist, kind of getting at a tangent here of like other ways the artist has created balance in the piece. We've got Thor's face, and then this like asteroid thing is pulling more energy back that way. And then in the background, we've got some brightness here, which is pulling us back this way. There are a lot of ways that center bias has come into play in this piece. And then, of course, because it's also realistic space, we're organizing foreground, middle ground, and background as well. All right, let's compare foreground, middle ground, and background and pyramid side by side. So this is a composition that is just pyramid, no foreground, middle ground, background. And in this case, I added in that additional rule of foreground, middle ground, background. So in pyramid, we have our focal area is center biased. Most of my visual weight is on the bottom, and I have equal visual weight on both left and right sides. All of those things are still true over here, but I'm adding an additional rule. The rule of structure, foreground, middle ground, background. So in this case, I need to be able to physically understand space. There's going to be overlapping. So I should be able to know exactly if I was going to cut this out of paper, what to layer on top of the other one. So you can see that the Nike symbol is right here. I can touch it. Its shadow is there. And then those 3 stripes are behind it. This orange thing is behind that, etc. If we compare that to the other side, there's this weird, these 3 stripes are magically in front of and behind the Nike symbol, which is a little confusing. And then is there a hole in this blue space? Where, if I was making this orange shape, is it cut? Is it not cut? Is it a solid shape that there's this blue circle in front of that's see-through? There's a lot more. It's not clear what's happening with realistic space. It's not following those rules. All right, also, you'll notice possibly the placement of color. Let you look at it for a second. In foreground, middle ground, background, remember, all the detail is in the front. All the emphasis is in the front. So we want to keep our bright colors, our saturated colors, our high contrast in the foreground, not in the background. And so you can see that these gray circles that did happen in the front in this pyramid, just frankly because I thought they looked cool, they don't make sense there now, foreground, middle ground, background, because a gray, muted color would not happen in front of a bright color. So here we've got all of our bright colors are fully in the front, and they overlap, come in front of all those gray shapes in the background. So this is the pyramid abstract design, just following that foreground, middle ground, background rule as well.